Well, football season starts in about a week, which means it's time for my least favorite yearly tradition, and that is trying to guess whether or not Matthew Stafford's back is going to hold up this year. Welcome in, everybody, to the reveal of the number 7 team in my power rankings as we head into the start of the 2025 NFL season. Today, we'll be taking a deep dive into the Los Angeles Rams. After this team won the Super Bowl in 2022 with that kind of star-studded, top-heavy, F-them-picks built roster, this team has done such an impressive job turning over to a different championship caliber era. And obviously coming in with the 7th spot in my rankings, this team has legitimate hopes and expectations that they could get another ring here in this Sean McVay, Matthew Stafford timeline. But a lot to discuss here today. Things that they do need to go right if that is going to happen, which is going to make this a very fun deep dive today. I do want to say I am recording this here about, 12 hours, 20 hours before the cut deadline. So there's going to be some releases and moves inevitably over the next 10 hours. Just keep that in mind if I talk about a guy and he ends up getting cut. The reality is, at this point, most of the guys that do get cut will end up back on the practice squad, so it really doesn't change anything, but that did need to be addressed. Kind of need to keep the series going here. We have 5 more of these to do. We already did the number 6 team with Tampa Bay last week. But yeah, got to keep the series going here so we can get it done in time. Don't have time to sit around and wait for practice squatters to figure out if they're making the 53 or going to get, have to clear through waivers and all that stuff. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started. So in this series, we go through all of the position groups, including the coaching staff, and start each of those chapters by taking a look at their offseason changes and asking whether they got better, worse, or stayed the same. And we will start that with the coaching discussion here for the Rams. A rare season where they maintain all of their key staff members, same coordinators here under Sean McVay this year. So the rare Rams offseason where they get to stay neutral with the coaching staff. But yes, let's get into the coach and scheme breakdown with Sean McVay at the helm here. And McVay has absolutely earned his place on that top shelf of NFL coaches, whether you would rank him first, second, third, it's all minutia. He is absolutely in the conversation for who the best head coach in the NFL is. I personally have him ranked second here for this 2025 season. But obviously getting over the hump, winning that Super Bowl in 2022 was huge for Sean McVay and his legacy and how you might rank him amidst head coaches. But sort of transitioning out of that era as well as Aaron Donald retires and they say goodbye to a lot of those star-studded, top-heavy portions of the roster, guys like Jalen Ramsey, Von Miller, pieces that they were aggressive to build a top-heavy roster that basically just overwhelmed opponents with difference makers. This time around, they've just become a different version of the Los Angeles Rams and are climbing their way back up now towards championship contention. That's just super impressive. We've seen this team build through the draft much more. They've used their first-round picks and hit on them, especially last year with what we saw with Jared Verse, but they've filled out this roster with a lot of youth and depth. You feel that from this team, and even just the style of McVay's offense has really undergone some changes. One of the most pivotal sort of decisions that Sean McVay has made here to help see through this transition from the old version of this team to the new is over the last couple of years really taking an introspective look at his run game, which even when they were a championship caliber team a few years ago, the Rams under McVay really haven't had a good run game other than when they just had Todd Gurley in his prime, which obviously helped way back when, but they had struggled to run the ball for a few years there. But what we've really seen here in 2023, 2024, since winning that Super Bowl is McVay evolving their run game, being more of a duo inside run game oriented offense without, sacrificing all of the great play action stuff that is obviously going to be a core part of any Sean McVay / Kyle Shanahan style offense that they run here. And really just so big for McVay to continue to stay ahead of the curve in terms of being innovative, understanding league trends, what's working, what's not working, what might he be able to change within his offense that's going to beat modern metas in the NFL, and really him looking at the league being a league that wants to play two high defenses, live in that 4-2 nickel base front. Him saying, well, if they're going to do that, why kind of run into the teeth of the defense towards the outside with a bunch of wide zone? Let's go right at these guys and force these undersized defensive tackles and linebackers to take on double teams and stop the inside run game. And instead of what so many of these offenses have done with drafting and signing athletic, undersized, wide zone based offensive linemen, McVay has gone out and gotten his Kevin Dotson, Steve Avila, and just smashing guys up front. It's just been a really fun evolution of the Sean McVay offense, and it's obviously worked really well here. So he just continues to check every single box as a head coach, whether it's being an elite culture guy. This guy clearly understands the human element of being a head coach, player development, the idea that, certain players are going to respond to different forms of motivation, whether they need a little tough love or go a little bit easier on them. I think he really understands that. Obviously, the scheming and the innovation is huge. And then the results have come as well. So, really no bad words to say about Sean McVay. He is the core asset that the Rams do have, and the main reason that the Rams and Rams fans should have some hope that maybe they could go all the way this year. So obviously going to see very impressive rankings in terms of the coaching splits that I do assign to every team in this series. They come in tied for first for overall coach and culture, which is sort of your benefit of the doubt slider, how well the coach has developed chemistry and a winning culture inside his organization. I think McVay has clearly done that. But yes, the pass game coach rankings tied for first as well, first to fourth. McVay is as good of a pass game designer as anybody in the league. It feels like once, twice, three times a game, the ability for him to set up certain plays and understand what coverages he's going to get from the defense and dial up coverage beaters with either, guys coming open on busted coverages or finding those open guys in certain zone looks. Just very, very good at putting together his passing game. And then everything we just talked about with the run game as well. They have really climbed up with the run game coaching with these Rams as well, where I now have them 3rd to 7th for offensive run game coaching as well. Now, you can at least note that Mike LaFleur is here as the listed offensive coordinator. He had his failures when he kind of left and tried to run the Jets offense, so it could be some time until we see him kind of get that nod towards someone else hiring him to be an offensive coordinator again, to be in command of his own offense as opposed to just being next to Sean McVay there. But it does feel like only a matter of time before the young Mike LaFleur does get another chance there. So we'll see if and when that happens. He's been here now for a few years. But now we can flip over to the defensive coaching discussion, which this is the other thing that we didn't even mention with Sean McVay, his ability to just continue to replenish his coordinators. We've now seen them go through coordinator after coordinator on both sides of the ball. Wade Phillips retires here. They lose Brandon Staley after a couple of years. Raheem Morris goes and gets a head coaching job elsewhere. So they've continued to replenish defensive coaches, as we'll discuss with Chris Shula, who just might be the best of the defensive coaches they've had here. And then, of course, losing a bunch of offensive coordinators as well, whether that's a Matt LaFleur or a Kevin O'Connell, Liam Cohen, you name it. Sean McVay is kind of infamous for having his own private list that is probably security locked behind about 3 different passwords because it's been that valuable for him. But he's got a list of guys around the league that, the second they become available to bring into his staff one way or another, he's going to bring them in. And he just sees something that other coaches can't in many cases in terms of finding the right people to coach his football team. He's just got a special knack for it. So that's another feather in Sean McVay's cap. But that alludes here to Chris Shula, the defensive coordinator here, the grandson of Don Shula, the most winningest head coach in NFL history. That Don Shula. Yeah, the bloodlines are there with Chris here, but the results were here with Chris Shula as well. Look, man, we had this Rams deep dive last year. I didn't hate the Rams. I ranked them 12th heading into the season, and I think that was fair. But my biggest holdup on this team was the defense. I think you can make an argument that heading into the season, the Rams on paper had the worst defensive roster in the league. It was certainly bottom three. Now, I wasn't high enough on the talent level of some of these rookie defensive linemen, especially someone like Jared Verse, but Braden Fisk was better than I expected as well. So he did have at least some pieces to work with in terms of pass rushers up front, but they certainly weren't God mode up front. And then you look at the linebackers in the secondary, and the poor roster talent assessment certainly held up. And Chris Shula took that and turned it into like a very average defense that, as the season went on, was certainly good enough for this team to be a legitimate playoff contender, to go toe-to-toe with the Philadelphia Eagles. This Rams team in a blizzard was the only team really close to beating the Eagles in the playoffs last season. And while this team's deficiencies in terms of stopping the run, which I do think is vastly a roster talent issue, we will continue to discuss that as this deep dive goes on. But their ability to run stunts and blitzes and elevate what was already a very solid to good defensive line, as we learned as the season went on, but to use the scheme to get even more pass rushing ability out of those guys up front. Nobody schemed up their team's pass rush better than Chris Shula did last season, in my opinion. Knowing exactly what buttons to push at the right time, whether it's stunts or the occasional blitz. This wasn't a super blitz-happy team, but they were a very stunt-happy team. But even when they did blitz, which they were roughly bottom 10 in blitz rate, but when they did blitz, also making sure they were effective in catching offenses off guard and letting linebackers come through and creating some of that phantom pressure with some of these 3-4 fronts where they might slide one way and then the blitz hits them the other way. So just highly effective at scheming up their pass rush. And then also coaching the secondary to be disciplined, to communicate well, and get the most out of one of, if not the worst secondaries in the league last year, at least on paper, just to have guys keep things in front of you, tackle, communicate, and don't bust coverages. Don't allow those huge, big explosive plays through the passing game. I really think Chris Shula did as good of a job as any defensive coordinator in the league in his first year as a defensive coach. There were some other impressive performances out there. Jesse Minter, obviously what Vic Fangio did with the Eagles. But Chris Shula absolutely made a case, even though this was kind of an average defense. But I think it's just as impressive to take what we knew was one of the worst rosters in the league and make it an average defense. I think that's roughly as impressive, honestly, as Philadelphia and Vic Fangio taking a great roster and being an elite defense. It's kind of the same idea in my mind, at least. So Shula is very quickly climbing in my defensive coach rankings. I already have the Rams ranked as high as 7th for pass defense coaching. And again, that's just trending up. That's about as high as you could possibly go after just 1 year of Chris Shula doing this here. And then the run defense side of things, I think, does need to come along. I don't think there was anything from a coaching or scheming perspective that necessarily you should be critical of. It's more of a talent thing for me, but they need to get the results as a run defense before I start, ranking Chris Shula as a good coach of the run defense. But yes, Shula is on a skyrocket trajectory. You would think, as we've seen with every Sean McVay, coordinator, whether it's offensive or defensive, these guys get plucked, and you factor in that this is Don Shula's grandson, and he did a great job last year in his first stint as a defensive coordinator. I don't know that there is a higher ranking head coach candidate for the 2026 hiring cycle than Chris Shula. So in terms of the Rams, it does maybe put a little bit of extra pressure on them to maybe get it done this year, especially now as kind of a transition to our next segment here, knowing that Matthew Stafford is 37 years old, dealing with, consistent back injuries seemingly every offseason now. So maybe a little bit of extra pressure on the Rams to get her done here in 2025. But at the same time, it all circles back to what we said about Sean McVay, just consistently finding this team's way through the woods, finding whatever answers need to be found to help this team sustain success, well into the future here as well. So they are in the best of hands with Sean McVay there. But let's transition to the roster side of things and the quarterback. And here as well, really no changes this offseason. It'll be Matthew Stafford back with Jimmy Garoppolo. So they are staying neutral at quarterback as well. Kind of the two heavy pillars of this Rams team being McVay and Matthew Stafford, the two constants from the Super Bowl winning team to the new version of this team. But yes, Matthew Stafford here at age 37, we've already discussed it throughout the intro, like his back injury, and not just whether or not he's ready to go for week one, which it is trending much more and more over the last week or so towards, yes, he's going to be ready. But it's not necessarily that I'm worried about. It's about how much does it potentially show up this year in terms of his physical skills, mobility, and the ability to kind of generate everything he needs through his back into his core and his lower body to get the velocity on his fastball, if you will, where Matthew Stafford to this day at 37 years old still has one of the better arms in the NFL, at worst top 10. So how much does it show up in terms of reducing Matthew Stafford from what we know he is at his best? And then beyond that, can he stay healthy as the year goes on? And I have so much PTSD from after the year they won the Super Bowl 2022, where they fell off, right? They got injured, they missed the playoffs, they had kind of this Super Bowl hangover and needed to kind of refocus and have this transition to this new era of Rams football that we've talked about. Heading into that 2023 season, I was terrified of Matthew Stafford's injury and whether he was going to be available and play at a high level for this Rams team. So much so that I tanked their quarterback rating in this series, and it led to them ranking in the bottom 5 of the league as we headed into that 2023 season, and it bit me in the ass, right? That team was pretty damn good. They did respond. Matthew Stafford stayed healthy and played really, really well. So I do have PTSD trying to guess what the hell is going to happen with Matthew Stafford and his back, which it's not just this offseason, right? This has been going on since Detroit, since the Rams traded for him. Even in that year that they won the Super Bowl, he was kind of dealing with some stuff until he got hot and healthy at the right time heading into those playoffs where they did win the Super Bowl. So it is just the biggest of wild cards for this Rams team. Obviously, I'd be lying if I said I'm not scared of this derailing this Rams season. But besides that, if Matthew Stafford is healthy, if he proves yet again his toughness and his ability to play through this, because this dude is one of the most gritty, hard-nosed, play through injuries type of players that we've seen in the NFL over the last decade plus. If Stafford is able to be his old self, I have the Rams ranking 6th at quarterback in the NFL. I do still view him as that superstar tier 2 QB that as long as you put a pretty good team around him, you should be in Super Bowl contention. And I do think this is a pretty good team around Matthew Stafford, as we'll discuss. He sees the game as well as just about any quarterback in the league today in terms of processing and decision-making and throwing with anticipation. He can fire in some just batshit crazy tight window throws. Some of these corner routes and dig routes that just, go past the ear hole of a linebacker or just over the outreached arms of a leaping curl flat zone defender towards the deep corner. Or even firing it up the seam. He can still make 3 or 4 of the most just impressive throws that you'll see from any quarterback throughout the course of the season when you pair that anticipation, the understanding of zone coverages with his still very, very good arm talent. And his pocket presence and ability to manage the rush is still really impressive as well. He's slowed down. He's not this crazy play extender or anything like that. But the way that he's able to just stand in there knowing he's going to get hit, kind of his ability to just kind of extend plays within the pocket, it's all still very, very impressive. So on the field, I just don't have too much bad to say about Matthew Stafford. I do think last season we saw some of the turnover-worthy plays and some of the bad Matthew Stafford did show up a little bit more. That's why he's not an elite tier 1 quarterback, right? With all the good things we've said about Matthew Stafford, I do think he is a little bit more of a streaky quarterback and always has, in the sense that he kind of has some hot streaks and he can have some cold streaks where he just kind of loses that balance of making correct reads and aggressiveness a little bit at times. And last year was a year that we saw that. I'm not necessarily worried about that. That's just who Matthew Stafford has always been. Even in that Super Bowl season, he wasn't playing that great in that first year with the Rams until he was at the right time in the playoffs. And that's another thing that Matthew Stafford should get a lot of credit for at this point, is I think he does have that clutch factor. He does seem to, play at his best when it does matter most. And we just didn't get to see that for the most part in Detroit. They just weren't in a lot of big time playoff moments. The clutch Matthew Stafford moments I remember in Detroit are mostly week 6 comebacks against the Bears, that kind of stuff. We've gotten to see it on a much bigger spotlight here with the Rams as well. But yeah, I've got a lot of good things to say about Matthew Stafford. I'm just terrified of the injury, as I think everybody kind of is at this point. So huge wild card for this team. But I will say they do have Jimmy Garoppolo as a backup, which, I don't think I would say the Rams are going to go on a Super Bowl run. It's not impossible. We've seen Jimmy Garoppolo go to Super Bowls with, good Shanahan-style offensive coached teams with the Niners, obviously. I look at this much more as all right, if Stafford does need a month off and you need to get him healthy with his back heading into the playoffs, Jimmy Garoppolo can keep you very, very competitive. They would certainly need to change some of the types of plays that they can call, but for the most part, within the confines of a Sean McVay offense, they love attacking the middle of the field. They're very good at getting the ball out quickly into playmakers' hands. Guys like Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, obviously over the years, Jordan Whittington here, maybe a Tutu Atwell. Jimmy Garoppolo, to this day, still has one of the fastest releases. So he's very good at that kind of point guard mentality. And he's good at being aggressive to attack the middle of the field. He's over-aggressive. He doesn't see linebackers a lot of times, and you're always going to run the risk of those stinker games from Jimmy Garoppolo where he seems to throw the ball straight to the teeth of the defense 2 or 3 times. It doesn't happen every week, but he's got some inconsistency to his game in that sense as well. But I definitely think within the confines of a Sean McVay offense that does fit Jimmy Garoppolo's style and where he wins as a passer very, very well, I think he is one of the best backups, if not the best backups in the league, and that matters when you're talking about probably the most injury-prone starter among starting quarterbacks in the league outside of maybe Miami, but that's a different debate for a different time, I guess, that I don't really have any interest in having that debate. Matthew Stafford is injury-prone at the end of the day, so having a great backup really matters. So I like that he's here for sure. It raises the floor of this team, especially, like I said, if it's more of okay, Matthew Stafford's back is really bothering him. He needs a month to recover so that he's healthy in January. And then Jimmy can step in and go 2-2 in that timeline, as opposed to the idea of oh shoot, Matthew's done for the year and we need Jimmy to step in and win them a Super Bowl. That's probably not going to happen, right? And then you do have Stetson Bennett as well. He's very mobile. He's tough. I like Stetson Bennett for what he is, but he's, in my opinion, not better than Jimmy Garoppolo in terms of throwing the ball and running this offense. So yeah, very favorable ratings for the Rams at quarterback. They come out 6th there, just with a big wild card indicator next to that, though, with those injury concerns. But let's continue to go through this Rams roster and now talk about the weapons and who these quarterbacks are throwing to this year. So they did make some big moves this offseason. They say goodbye at wide receiver to Cooper Kupp. Was still good for this team, but not what he used to be. And he himself comes with some injury flags, but Demarcus Robinson as well, who stepped in as a very useful wide receiver 3 for them last year. That is a notable departure for them. And then even Tyler Johnson played some good games for them last year too. So it's not that they aren't losing anybody, but they do go out and get Davante Adams, a very exciting addition that I'm excited to break down here in just a second. And then they do draft Konata Mumpfield in the 7th round, but we'll talk about why in just a second, but I do say upgraded at wide receiver, even though they're losing Cooper Kupp and some other good backups there in Robinson and Johnson. But then at tight end, I said neutral here. Rams fans won't like that because they did take the first pick of their draft and spend it on Terrence Ferguson. Now they did collect an extra first-round pick next year from the Falcons in that trade down. Kind of a fun, interesting hedge against their former head coach there, or their former defensive coordinator, who is the Falcons head coach. So I do like the trade down from the Rams if we're assessing this move overall in terms of team building strategy. But to basically their first pick in this draft was Terrence Ferguson, a super hyper raw athlete at the tight end position that I saw as a late 3rd round, early 4th round type of developmental prospect. Certainly was not my favorite pick that a team made this draft. I just don't see a contributor in 2025. And then they did lose Hunter Long, who wasn't much of a factor. But yeah, I just don't see the addition of Terrence Ferguson as enough for me to say upgraded at tight end. Not this season, at least. We'll see how his development goes. I said neutral at tight end. Now, I can at least hold my hand up and say I was critical of them being aggressive to move up for Braden Fisk last year, and you know, that's worked out much better for them than I would have thought. And this team obviously has earned a lot of benefit of the doubt. So if Rams fans want to just take Sean McVay's word for this and trust that this is going to work out, there's nothing I can really say to convince you otherwise. I'm just telling you what my opinion was of Terrence Ferguson was there. And, we'll maybe talk about him a little bit more here as we take an in-depth look at this group of weapons, which is really a spectacular group in a league flooded with great playmakers and great groups of weapons. I have the Rams ranked as high as 6th to 7th for weapons for this series. And they've got some depth. They've got some interesting guys to talk about here that will be fun ancillary pieces in this passing game. But like I said, I viewed this group as upgraded this offseason, going to get Davante Adams, even though they're losing Cooper Kupp here. And the core reason for that is something I talk about so much in this series, and that is filling out your group of weapons, not just with great players, but with the right selection of complementary skill sets. And I really think Puka Nacua was drafted in Cooper Kupp's image, just in terms of how he wins, his play style, where he lines up, and he had become redundant with Cooper Kupp. This was something I talked about throughout the year with my Fully Inflated Football podcast, and just how, look, Cooper Kupp, really nice player. Puka Nacua is an emerging superstar, but it had become a little bit congested in terms of where these guys win and how they dominate. So even if you wanted to debate that Cooper Kupp and Davante Adams are comparable skill sets, I disagree. I think Davante Adams has aged better and is more durable and is just a straight up upgrade than Cooper Kupp. But if you're trying to build the right collection of complementary skills here, Davante makes so much more sense next to Puka Nacua than Cooper Kupp does. And this duo immediately becomes one of the best wide receiver duos in the NFL, in my opinion. So we'll just kind of discuss these guys together. But look, Puka Nacua, like I said, in the image of Cooper Kupp, is that sort of big slot demon. Just in terms of formational usage, the Rams have really leaned into the idea of being an 11 and a half personnel team, 11 personnel being a 3 wide receiver package and 12 personnel being a 2 wide receiver package with 2 tight ends out there. The Rams kind of figuring out that if you have a wide receiver that can do a lot of tight end stuff, it forces the defense to defend you a certain way that you can then decide how you want to attack them. So if they come out in nickel to treat your big wide receiver as a wide receiver, as most teams will, great. We have an advantage in the run game because we have a big-bodied wide receiver that can actually hinge block against defensive ends and take out weak side linebackers in the run game, just like an extra tight end could. Or if you want to defend this team by coming out in a base look, good luck. You now have either a safety or a linebacker, sometimes even an edge rusher, trying to cover a Puka Nacua or a Cooper Kupp. And now with Cooper Kupp kind of out of the picture, Puka is going to do even more of that stuff. But it's not like they haven't used him in that role either. They've kind of rotated those guys in that spot. But that to me is really the ultimate chess piece and unique advantage that a Sean McVay offense brings to the table, in my opinion. So Puka should absolutely thrive there, running crossing routes off of play action. He's really good, and the Rams are really good at tapping into him after the catch, just kind of quick bubble screens, quick hitches, slants, you name it. Just get the ball in his hands quickly because he is built like a running back and is shifty and instinctive and tough like a running back, but also running corner routes and dig routes where he can get into the second level of the defense, where he can make remarkable catches through traffic. He is really good at attacking the ball, high pointing the ball, playing through contact. But what Puka Nacua isn't necessarily is an excellent outside wide receiver. He's pretty good at it, but I don't think he's as good as Davante Adams is as an outside wide receiver, where you're going to see more press coverage. You're going to be asked to attack vertically a little bit more. Play fast within timing throws, whether it's getting open on a back shoulder comeback or those backside digs. Especially this was something I'm really excited about with Devontae coming in. They haven't had that guy that can play the Odell Beckham role from that Super Bowl winning offense where, okay, Stafford's reading the trip side. He's reading that kind of 11.5 personnel side that's going to have Puka and a tight end and another wide receiver out there. That's kind of where they put a lot of stress on zone defenses and man concepts to stick with those kind of condensed formations. And then if it's not open, Stafford, as good as anybody at just flipping his head around, understanding that if it's not open, that's probably because the zone defenses and zone defenders, collapsed on that strong side of his progression. And then no problem. Right on time, he can flip that neck around, find that backside dig, hit, in this case, Devontae Adams, who's still in the conversation for who the best route runners in the league are. He is so brilliant at getting off press coverage if he's isolated as a backside X wide receiver or Z, whichever way you want to kind of describe him formationally. But either way, the same idea. If he's left on an island seeing press coverage on the backside, he's going to be able to get off of it and then snap into that intermediate space. And also if it's zone coverage, just so good at sorting through that traffic and making sure that he can get into that area on time. Even at his age, he's so good at it. And the types of routes he wins at, he doesn't need electric top speed to do it, but he does have good top speed. So these guys are going to play so well off each other. I think both these guys are going to eat within this offense, especially if Matthew Stafford is healthy. Both of these are guys that I would be targeting in fantasy. Every time I do take Puka Nacua, I'm a little bit scared of durability. This guy, going back to college, was hurt all the time. He's missed some time with the Rams, and I think it's because he plays so batshit crazy. It's a little bit of that Deebo Samuel in there, where he is kind of taking some extra hits that a lot of wide receivers don't. So that's really the only holdup here is durability on Puka and age on Devontae Adams. Is there a small chance that this isn't a top 3 or 4 wide receiver duo in the league and a core part of this Rams team and their success? There's a chance, but I'm just not that worried about it. I really lean more on the side of this is going to work and be really, really fun to watch. And then talk about complementary groups of skill sets with the offense really running through these two guys. everybody else has their role here and fills in really nicely. They bring Tutu Atwell back on a 1-year, $10 million contract. I think a lot of people were surprised when they saw that, but viewers of this deep dive know that I've kind of defended Tutu over the last couple of years. Like, is he a full-time starter and this awesome player? And even like, has he lived up to the second round pick that they spent on him? No, certainly not, but he's an excellent separator. He is a guy that brings speed and juice that guys like Puka and Adams don't necessarily bring. You know, Puka, I think Rams fans are going to be a little upset that I said that. Puka is one of these guys that is much faster with the ball in his hands, in my opinion, than he is kind of as a separator within his routes. A lot of like Deebo Samuel comparisons there, that same trait. But Tutu is very fast within his routes and stretching the field. And if you do want to kind of have those layered post-route play-action concepts where you've got a crossing route and a deep post, and if the safety does converge on the crossing route against Puka Nacua or Devontae Adams, whoops, Tutu Atwell just screamed open on the backside post for a 60-yard touchdown. Like, he can provide that for this offense. So he's going to rotate in there as their kind of speed player, and he's going to get added opportunities as well because, yes, they've added Devontae to the mix here, but they are losing two guys that were kind of threatening Tutu's playing time in both Cooper Kupp and Demarcus Robinson. So Tutu's going to see an added workload, and I think he's going to show a lot of people this year that he's a very useful player, and the Rams are not going to regret giving him $10 million. But then you got Jordan Whittington as well, and he's just an awesome piece for this team to have. And I think his existence as well is a big part of why they were willing to move on from Cooper Kupp. Because he's very much another one of these guys that was drafted in that kind of big slot wide receiver role. And he was one of these draft prospects that I said, look, if he goes to the wrong scheme, he's going to be useless. But if he goes to a Sean McVay or a Kyle Shanahan, like, he could be something like a Jawan Jennings in the confines of that offense as kind of that 11.5 personnel wide receiver, as we described with Puka Nacua. Now, for the most part, if Puka's healthy, I think they will keep Puka in that role. But if they're in more of a run-heavy game script, they can take Puka and play him outside and put Jordan Whittington in there, where Whittington is a way better run blocker than Tutu Atwell. And Whittington as well is annoying after the catch. So if teams are focusing on Puka and Devontae and you get a little bit of extra space underneath, look out for Jordan Whittington to just be a nuisance underneath as well. But he's a very useful player. He's probably going to play about 30% of their snaps here if everybody's healthy. But also, if Puka is going to get banged up, like I said, Puka, you know, even if it's not necessarily the fear of significant injuries with Puka, if he's got to miss a game here, a game there, because he, you know, breaks a finger or, you know, like, hate to say it, but like takes a bad hit over the middle of the field and has to miss a week in the concussion protocol. Like, to me, those are the types of injuries that Puka just seems like he's always kind of vulnerable to, just because he's arguably the most physical, batshit crazy wide receiver in the league. That's where having Jordan Whittington's really nice, because he can just plug right into that role. You don't have to change anything. You're not going to get quite as much dynamism, but you can do the same stuff you want to do. So I love having Jordan Whittington there. And that's your core four. You know, you've got Xavier Smith, who's an undersized kind of return guy. They draft Kanata Mumfield at the very end of the draft. Just not really any physical traits to get excited about with him, and not a guy that I was necessarily betting on as a draft prospect. But, you know, the Rams are very good at kind of taking those outlier players. In this case, a player that just isn't a great athlete, but is a really smart, tough football player. So maybe they can find the right role within this offense for him to be a decent backup. And then Britton Covey as well. I would imagine it's probably either going to be Covey or Xavier Smith that make this team, and we'll probably get that news here maybe even before this deep dive gets posted. But then you have your tight ends, and all of these guys play their roles as well. So we're not done describing these kind of useful ancillary weapons here. So you still got Tyler Higbee, who is getting up there in age. He turns 33 after this season. And you got to think this is probably his last year here, but he still is the best run blocker that they have. He is the true full Y tight end that this team does need to have a good run game. I think the hope is that Terrence Ferguson can kind of bulk up and develop his blocking and eventually become this guy. We'll see. Ferguson is very, very light, and I will describe him a little bit further here in a minute. But yeah, I think they'll still get what they want out of Tyler Higbee this year. And as a receiving threat, he's just kind of that classic possession tight end. He does make really tough catches at times, and he's usually in the right place for Matthew Stafford timing-wise, so still has his role as that big-bodied possession tight end here. And then even Colby Parkinson, I think, will probably play ahead of Terrence Ferguson. We'll see. They did obviously spend a second-round pick on Ferguson, but Parkinson is the one that has developed in the league. Like, Colby Parkinson as a prospect versus Terrence Ferguson as a prospect, honestly, pretty damn close. I think I had about a late third, early fourth on Parkinson as well, and he's done a great job to bulk up and become more of a complete player. But if they do want to run 12 personnel, which apparently they do want to run more 12 personnel, that just doesn't make sense to me because of everything we said about kind of the idea of 11.5 personnel being the core identity of what's worked so well for the Rams. So we'll see if they kind of stick to that. And obviously you can still do both. It's not like if you run some more 12 personnel, you can never run 11 personnel, right? So I do believe they'll run some more 12 this year with those two tight ends out there. But I'm curious to see if Colby Parkinson is their tight end too, because I think Colby as a wing tight end next to Tyler Higbee, more of the athletic guy for 12 personnel that does have, in my opinion, much better blocking than Terrence Ferguson coming out of Oregon. I would wager that Colby Parkinson will be their number 2 tight end, and I do like him in that role. He hasn't really had that breakout step that I maybe was hoping he would have over the last couple of years. I thought maybe he would overtake Tyler Higbee as this team's full-time tight end. It just hasn't been there for him. He's maybe a little bit more maxed out at this point, but I do still like him. And then, yes, you do have Terrence Ferguson, who I understand, like, it's just hard to find 6'5" athletes like Terrence Ferguson that has the requisite, like, speed basically to be more of a potential difference-making tight end than someone like Tyler Higbee. But I really think we've seen a trend of these types of guys getting way overdrafted in the NFL. And maybe I'm wrong. Like, maybe they've just found their Sam Laporta and they're going to do a bunch of stuff that, like, Detroit's offense did and completely make me look like an idiot, right? Like, Sean McVay has obviously earned that benefit of the doubt here, but I just saw a guy that was way too thin to be ready to play an inline tight end position out the gate, and maybe he can bulk up, very quickly. But I didn't see a guy with, like, natural ball skills. Frankly, I was more often than not let down watching all of his targets in terms of his ability to win body positioning and convert contested catches. I didn't see an instinctive football player after the catch. Like, I think having instincts with the ball in your hands and being a weapon after the catch is, like, so important for these real difference-making tight ends. Like, yeah, Ferguson is fast, and if you hit him on a crossing route, he can continue to outrun linebackers and stuff. But it's not like he's even that fast, right? He ran a 4.63. Like, I think his acceleration is really good, and he is a good athlete, but he's not, like, an amazing athlete, you know what I'm saying? So I just didn't really understand this one. I don't even know for sure that he is going to develop into the player that they want him to be and that he's going to even, like, become a starter on this team. We'll see. I mean, that would be a colossal disappointment for a second-round pick, but I honestly think, like, settling in the Colby Parkinson role is a more likely outcome for him, where he's kind of a quasi-starter for 12 personnel, but at the end of the day, I feel like the Rams are always going to want that firm blocking tight end in there as long as they are of the same offensive identity that they are today. So I don't know. That's my assessment. Rams fans can let me have it if you want, but obviously, like, not someone I'm really targeting in my dynasty leagues and that kind of stuff. Just kind of someone I'm betting against, but I did still put the up arrow on him because he will get better. It's just a matter of how much better. We will see. And then Davis Allen, I think will make this team as well as a, balanced tight end 4. And then they do have their receiving backs as well. We can go through this pretty quickly, but Kyren Williams is a useful receiving back. He's a tough pass blocker. He's smart in terms of, like, check and release and being in the right place for Matthew Stafford, relatively safe hands. Just not like crazy elusive out in space or crazy explosive as like a route running mismatch problem. That was something he projected at being really good at the NFL level, and he's just been pretty good. I don't want to trash Kyren Williams, but I put the up arrow on him last year with a B- receiving grade, thinking he would kind of take that leap forward because we did see it at Notre Dame, and it just hasn't really been there for him as like a big impact in the receiving game. Not that he's, a drawback or anything, but I think he kind of is what he is as a solid receiving back. Blake Corum, very similar. And then, yeah, it's, they're pass catchers out of the backfield. We don't need to spend too much more time on them there, especially because our next segment here, we'll circle back to them in just a second. But yes, the weapons here are excellent. They rank 6th to 7th and are a core asset for this Rams team and why they are such a high-ranking team in these power rankings. But let's go to the backfield now with more of a focus on the run game. So we'll take a look at their offseason changes here. Really not a lot of change. They did spend a 4th-round pick on Jarquez Hunter out of Auburn, but not enough for me to say upgraded there. I said neutral at running back, just a little bit of added depth. But this is a continuation now of some really good roster talent on offense. They rank 8th to 11th at running back for me. And I think particularly with Kyren Williams, their lead bell cow back, really getting the contract extension here, he's interesting. Like, I don't think he's ever going to have the physical traits to be in that like superstar group of running backs, which we've kind of profiled throughout this series, right? You have those Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry. We'll see what Christian McCaffrey is going to be health-wise, but, Bijan Robinson, Josh Jacobs, Jahmyr Gibbs, Ashton Jinty, what do all those guys have in common? All of them have every, bit the physical traits that you would look for at a running back position where ultimately, it's a traits-based position. Let's not sugarcoat it. And they were all first-round picks with the exception of Derrick Henry, who went at the top of the 2nd round for some reason. Never should have happened, but all the other guys, first-round picks and first-round picks for a reason. Like, you've got that crop of, like, superstar running backs in the league. And then I think you can make a case that Kyren Williams is the next guy. There's a couple other guys that might be in that debate, but Kyren is so underrated, man. And, like, just to get this out of the way, like, he's still going at the end of the 3rd and, like, early 4th round in your fantasy drafts, and I don't understand it. This guy has had 2,600 rushing yards over the last 2 seasons. He's one of the real bell cow backs in the league that plays the majority of the game and all 3 downs. We already said he catches passes, but as long as he's healthy, they've shown like they paid him. Like, they are leaning into Kyren Williams. Don't worry about like Blake Corum overtaking this job like you might have when they spent a 3rd-round pick on Corum. He's here to be a backup. But Kyren Williams gets so underrated because he doesn't have the traits, right? He's small. He's 195 pounds. He's not that fast. He is not a physically imposing back. And when you get off the bus, you don't say, oh, shit, we got to go against Kyren Williams today, right? In the same way that you do saying we got to tackle Derrick Henry 25 times today. But my God, is Kyren Williams as effective with the traits that he does have as anybody. And I do think Kyren does have one elite trait for the running back position, and that is vision. I have said this before, I'll say it again. I think Kyren Williams has the best vision that we have seen from a running back since prime Le'Veon Bell, and that is unbelievable praise for anybody that watched Le'Veon Bell in his prime. And Kyren also does have very good first step acceleration and ability to hit the hole. And he can hit the right hole with burst in a way that even some other backs struggle to do inside these top running back rankings. So he's hyper consistent. He's always going to get what's blocked up. And then he's very savvy to like find holes that other running backs wouldn't be able to find, to see those quick hitting cutback lanes. He will see that. And then he's adequate at the second level in terms of contact balance, shiftiness. He's not going to be a league leader in missed tackles forced or anything like that. He's not going to be a league leader in yards after contact. But he is hyper efficient and super consistent. And to me, in the conversation again for like the top of whatever that next tier of running backs are in the NFL. So again, he's a big reason why the Rams are in good hands at this running back position, why they rank 8th to 11th in the NFL, but they do have a fun backup room as well. You have Blake Corum, who was absolutely drafted in Kyren Williams' image, and that was at a time where they didn't know necessarily if Kyren Williams was going to keep it up as a late day 3 pick, if they were going to want to pay him and all that stuff. They drafted Corum in the 3rd round because out of Michigan, a guy with maybe not the fastest guy, not the biggest guy, but again, good contact balance, excellent vision, good acceleration. As a backup to Kyren Williams and a true backup's backup, he makes so much sense, right? And if anything does happen to Kyren Williams, Blake Corum probably will break out. And he might become a guy in that case where the Rams could turn him into a 3rd round pick, or, he walks in free agency and they get a good comp pick for him or whatever. But Kyren is the guy. Make no mistake about it. The Rams committed to him financially for a reason. And with all that said, by the way, if you are playing any sort of underdog fantasy formats, whether it is best ball drafts where, like I said, he's going at the end of the 3rd round, early 4th round, his average draft position on underdog best ball is 32nd. And I like these other guys too, but like Bucky Irving, Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs, all going 10 spots higher than Kyren. The math ain't mathin' to me. Like, there's no reason Kyren, who's shown that he can stay healthy and is an excellent running back, shouldn't be able to get, again, 1,200 yards. And he's awesome at the goal line, by the way. He is so good at finding those little creases, and the Rams love feeding him touchdowns in those situations. And this consistency has shown up on the stat sheet. Like, he had 1,144 yards in the regular season in 2023 and 12 touchdowns. Last year, he had 1,300 yards and 14 touchdowns. Like, what are we doing here? Like, at some point, you got to wake up and realize that this guy's just really, really talented, and the Rams reinforced that financially, like I said. And then again, one of my favorite ways to play an underdog is the season-long options as well, and Kyren Williams there too. His rushing total is just over 1,000 yards at 1024. So I love putting him in those season-long lineups as well. So I will plug right now, if you guys want to play on underdog, it is code TFG. They'll give you bonus funds as well with the use of that code. Now is the time to get going there before those season-long higher, lower options are gone. And then you can also do your best ball drafts, of course, before the season starts as well. So I can get that going there. Code TFG at Underdog Fantasy. But back to real football here. The Rams obviously in good hands with Kyren and his kind of clone in the waiting in Blake Corum, but they have some other backups too. Jarquez Hunter gets drafted in the 4th round here. Really good backup running back for a 4th round pick. I don't see him as like a traitsy guy that ever really projected as a starter, but the Rams obviously looked at this depth chart and said, we've got to fill it out. We think he's a talented player and a good use of a draft pick. He's got good straight line speed, adequate shiftiness, adequate vision, was a productive starter in the SEC. He's tough. There's just a lot of stuff to like with him. He's just not the most traitsy guy. And again, that's kind of their type, sort of. He's a different style. He's a little bit more north and south, maybe a little bit more explosive than guys like Kyren and Blake Corum, but solid pick. Probably not going to play a lot this season, though. Then Ronnie Rivers, Cody Schrader, more in the Kyren Williams mold of good vision, but lacking traits there. But yes, there is your backfield. And now we can go to the offensive line for our last position group on this side of the ball. But they made some changes with the offensive line this offseason. They said goodbye to Jonah Jackson. They flip him to Chicago to take most of that bad contract. He only played 22% of their snaps last year. Moderate loss, but mostly in name. They're ready to replace him. And then Joseph Noteboom as well. They're finally off the hooks for that contract that didn't work out for them either. So definitely, like, if you're a Rams fan, feels good to kind of get those contracts off the books, because those, the signing of Jonah Jackson and the extension for Joe Noteboom just did not work out for this team. But they do bring Coleman Shelton back after a study abroad in Chicago. He's going to be their starting center this year on the cheap. And then they did sign some backup tackles as well, DJ Humphreys and David Kessenberry. And as we now turn our eyes towards breaking this unit down, one of those two guys probably won't make this team because we are now getting some pretty optimistic news on Alaric Jackson, who was really going through a very big question mark this offseason with like blood clots. But they seem to feel pretty good there. But before we go player by player here, let's talk about the rankings on the offensive line as a entire unit. So they come out as my 15th overall offensive line. Better as a run blocking unit, though, than pass blocking. They rank 12th for run blocking and much lower, 22nd to 26th for pass blocking. So a little bit more one-sided there, though not horrible in pass protection. But yes, let's go left to right, and we will start at left tackle there with Alaric Jackson, who, as I mentioned, has been basically getting looked at for a blood clot situation. They obviously want to be careful there, and hopefully everything is good to go and he can get through this season. It's not necessarily like a bone or a muscle or anything like that. It's just different. So if he's cleared, you would think he'll be good to go. So we'll see there. But other than that, on the field, he has developed into a very good left tackle. I hesitate to say franchise left tackle, but they did give him a nice contract extension, essentially as their franchise tackle, an average of $18.5 million a year over the next 3 years. But, when you're a pending free agent and the agent knows that Dan Moore is going to get $20 million, someone like Alaric Jackson has some added leverage there. Like, I still think he's in that kind of tier of tackles where if he's your starter, you're fine. You're not really worried about it. You can sleep well at night knowing you're going to get pretty solid both pass protection and run blocking. But at the same time, I think the Rams will consistently kind of be on the hunt to see if there might be upgrades at that core left tackle spot over the years. But overall, you're talking about a guy that's been a slam dunk addition for this team as an undrafted free agent, someone that once upon a time was like a top prospect coming out of Iowa, a highly recruited guy that theoretically had a lot of physical traits. But, he kind of just wasn't like in the right shape coming out of Iowa. He's had some question marks throughout the years. And it's been fun to see him kind of develop his technique, fill out his body a little bit more, and settle in here as a very good player. So I will stick with what I said. Like, you rest easy at night as long as he's healthy and available, knowing that you don't have to worry about your left tackle and Alaric Jackson, even if you could always probably, keep your eyes open to be more efficient and more dominant at that left tackle spot. But then at left guard, you have Steve Avila, second-round pick in 2023. And, his start to his NFL career, I think, looks kind of like the stock market, where you're going to see, generally speaking, you're trending upwards, but you're going to get some more staggering ups and downs throughout the process. And I think we're just kind of on that climb with Avila. He had his rocky moments last year. Now, to be fair, he gets hurt in week 1 and misses the first half of the year, so might have been dealing with some injuries there. But he did have some moments in the second half of the year where he had some ugly games in pass protection. So he's got to just stay more consistent in that sense, stay square, keep his head up, land his strikes, not have those bad games in pass pro. As a run blocker, he's been a 330-pound beast, as they would hope for. He hasn't been perfect. He's had his missed assignments and had his moments where he kind of gets over his feet a little bit and falls off blocks at times. But generally speaking, having that 330-pound beast in the middle of their offensive line for an offense that wants to run a lot of duo and drive these guys off the line and create space for the backs, he's been good in that sense. So he's someone I think is still trending up and should settle in as like a quality starter. I think, a player that he kind of reminds me of is like Isaac Seumalo a little bit. Seumalo's a little bit lighter, but just in terms of settling in as someone that you're hoping can be kind of your third best offensive lineman, somebody you don't have to worry about in time. Right now, he's closer to being the worst offensive lineman based on some of the issues he had last year. But the hope is the arrow is pointing up and he will develop. He's probably the biggest question mark, though, just in terms of like who the football player is and what they're going to get from him. But you should still feel pretty good about him just with some maybe hesitation with some of those uglier moments last year. But yeah, they bring in Coleman Shelton. He ends up winning this starting center job as far as we can tell at this point in time. A bit of a surprise because Bo Limmer was a fun athletic draft pick that played okay, at least in a run blocking sense last year. But obviously with Matthew Stafford having that back injury and some of the downs that Bo Limmer showed in pass pro last year, they don't want to mess around with that. They want to go with Coleman Shelton, the veteran center that, if nothing else, he's going to set protections. He knows the offense. He has started for this team for a while after he left and played for the Bears. He started for the Bears as well. If he gets isolated one-on-one, he doesn't have the physical traits to really dominate, whether that's in pass pro or the run game. But you can understand why they're going with him, and he should help set the floor of this offensive line, even if he will take his losses. Then you got Kevin Dotson, in my opinion, their best offensive lineman. He got the big contract extension here, deservedly so. He's just been a beast, man. He moves guys off the ball. He's been a great fit for this gap run scheme that they've shifted towards. He's a rock in pass protection. He hasn't had quite the pass blocking efficiency as he had in some of those years in Pittsburgh. He's actually kind of flipped, where I think he's become a much better run blocker over the years, but has kind of taken a step back as a pass blocker, but at least good in pass pro and very good as a run blocker. He's a beast, and you love having him at right guard. But then at right tackle, you have the aging Rob Havenstein, though I wouldn't say he's really regressing. He's kind of just been who he is throughout his career for the most part. He's not the traitsiest guy. He's a 6'8", 330-pound offensive tackle with just like adequate athleticism. So winning leverage and keeping up with incredible pass protectors on an island, it's never been his strong suit, but I think that's helped him age well too, because he doesn't depend on that athleticism. It depends on his technique and grip strength. And then as a run blocker, he's frankly been better the last couple of years as they've leaned really into this kind of north and south run scheme. He is able to create that drive as well, and him and Kevin Dotson working together has been a big asset for this run game on the right side of the line there. So he is getting older. He's 33 years old. Father time comes from everybody. There's no evidence that he's going to regress, and you feel pretty good about his ability to keep playing at a high level, but it is something to be conscious of that he is getting older as well. So it is overall a pretty balanced unit. At a weak link position group, they don't have any definitive weak links. They don't have any superstars in this group, so these guys will all kind of take their losses left and right. You're maybe a little bit worried about some of the lows Steve Avila showed in pass blocking last year, but generally speaking, again, they ranked 22nd to 26th for pass blocking, so kind of in that cluster of solid, okay, adequate, still want to get the ball out quickly and not see Stafford take too many hits, but that's kind of the hope, is they can be a solid unit there and then a very good run blocking unit, where again, I rank them 12th for run blocking. But they do have some depth worth talking about here. So a pair of veteran tackles, DJ Humphries and David Kessenberry. I think these guys were really brought in with some of the scares on Alaric Jackson. Humphries has certainly been regressing since several years ago. He was a pretty solid left tackle for the Cardinals. He's just hasn't played all that well when he's been out there. So hard to know exactly where he's going to land if he were to make this team or play this year. We'll see. I wouldn't be stunned if he ends up getting cut now that they're getting better news on Alaric Jackson. But theoretically, he's played good football in the past, and he's not that old. He's 32. So I at least like bringing him in as a flyer. And then David Kessenberry as well has played a lot in the NFL. He's been a very good swing tackle throughout his career. He's definitely up there in age, though. He is now 35 years old, just turned 35 here on Sunday. So not quite what he used to be and hasn't played too much in recent seasons, but same kind of idea there. Get some guys that have played at a high level in the past. Hope that one of those guys is in good shape if you have to go to them. And then you have Warren McClendon, who had to play a little bit last year. He's got some athleticism. He showed some good run blocking stuff. I don't think he would be the first one in off the bench, but they're hoping that developmental trajectory can keep heading upward and he can land as a capable backup. And best case scenario, he is a long-term starter. Still has a couple years left on his rookie contract to develop. And then in terms of the interior, really just a couple names there. Bo Limmer, who we mentioned, really athletic, tough guy out of Wisconsin. was awesome for their run blocking and probably would be a better run blocking option than Coleman Shelton, but just really wasn't ready in pass pro. So I still like him as maybe their long-term center, and I love him as a backup as well. But yeah, maybe for 2026 and beyond, you're talking about Bo Limmer getting his job back and still having a positive future as a 6th-round pick from last year. And then they do take a flyer on Willie Lampkin. This is something the Rams do, is just find these outlier types of players. They've had so much success using late-round draft picks and undrafted free agency to find the guys that like are available because of a, technicality or a unique outlier in their game. What's the outlier on Willie Lampkin? Well, he's 5'11" as an interior offensive lineman. That doesn't really exist in the NFL, but I think he's in a good position to make this team. We'll see what the final cut deadlines look like, but he's really athletic. He gets natural leverage because he is 5'11", so at times it actually plays in his favor. He's filled out. He's really stocky. Looked good at the Senior Bowl, so definitely a player to keep an eye on if you were to get opportunities here, just because of the Rams have had so much success with these physical outlier types of guys. And then Justin Dedich, however you say that last name, he played a little bit last year. He'll probably make the team. Beyond that, no one you feel very good about. So it's standard, adequate NFL depth that you're hoping you don't have to get into, because that's just what happens. If you got to go to NFL depth, you're going to see a fall off on the offensive line for just about everybody, and that wouldn't be any different here. Fortunately, outside of Alaric Jackson's blood clot situation, which again, once cleared, should be good to go theoretically, you don't really have too many medical concerns on your starters. So that rounds out this offense that does come out as my 5th ranked overall offense, but with balance as well. 6th in passing game, 11th in run game, and really not a ton of question marks, really. There's not a ton of pockets of this team, really, if any at all, outside of maybe like Steve Avila, that we really put the up arrow on and, said this is a part of this team that could be tremendously better than we've discussed. But they check pretty much every box, and the main question mark is just Matthew Stafford and his health. So if he stays healthy, this is a championship caliber offense again, ranking 5th for me here. Now, the defense played pretty well last year, but it was probably overstated just how well they played. They still have to get better on this side of the ball if they want to continue to get better as a team and go further than they went last year. It was obviously a feel-good season for what they looked like heading into the year, but they're hoping to hit some green lights here as well. So this is a really important side of the ball to discuss in terms of, can this be more of a Super Bowl contending football team? So we'll start with the defensive line and look at their offseason changes here. And they did make some moves here. So on the interior of the defensive line, they say goodbye to Bobby Brown, who was a pretty good nose tackle for them. He gets a nice contract with the Panthers, but I do think they upgraded there, bringing in Poona Ford, who's going to stay in the same stadium, but change teams, coming over from the Chargers. And then they did lose Neville Gallimore as well, who played a quarter of their snaps. Nothing to be concerned with there. But I said upgraded on the interior of the defensive line. I like the Ford signing quite a bit. But then on the edge, I said neutral. They say goodbye to really longtime veteran at this point, Michael Hoyt. Feels like he's been around here for a long time as that big-bodied edge. Unique player, but going with kind of the opposite physical profile in the draft, 3rd round, they select Josiah Stewart, who's much smaller, but a lot more twitch there. So we'll see what Stewart can be. We'll discuss him momentarily, but I just said neutral on the edge. Michael Hoyt's a nice player. I didn't want to disrespect him and just say they upgraded by drafting Josiah Stewart there, though it's possible in time that can be an upgrade. As we'll talk about here with this D-line. So this was really where I missed on this Rams team last year. This unit was awesome. And a lot of it was scheme focused with what we talked about with Shula, but a lot of it was also just some of these young guys were really good as rookies, especially Jared Verse, but Braden Fisk in particular was just way better than I thought he would be as a 2nd round pick that I thought was a reach. And I got to hold my hand up. I still don't think he's all the way through the woods in terms of being like a superstar or anything like that, but he definitely made a bigger impact on this team than I projected. And both Verse and Fisk, the impacts they were able to bring to this defense last year was from a roster perspective, the core reason why they had any success on defense at all. And this pass rush last year was one of the most annoying ones to deal with in the entire league. And that is reflected now in the rankings. Whereas last year we would have had this pass rush ranking probably in the bottom 5. I can actually check that and go back. I had them 25th to 29th last year. Now they're pushing for the top 5. They rank 5th to 10th for pass rush for me. Not quite as good for D-line run defense, but 19th to 23rd there, seeing some improvements there as well, where last year they were 27th to 31st. And I know I've gotten some requests to do this kind of retroactive look for every position group. I think that's a little bit much for me to handle from an editing and discussion conversation, but there are certain groups that are very fun, certainly, to go back and do those kind of flashbacks to last year's deep dives. So I'll try to do that where I think it's appropriate. But let's get into this unit, who, by the way, does rank as my 11th overall defensive line. But you have to start with Jared Verse. And it's not that I was low on Jared Verse, far from it. I thought it was a great pick for them and that he would make an impact, and he was kind of their saving grace for me when we had that conversation last year. Was excited to see what he was going to do, but even then, did not anticipate him being as good as he was last year. He was, in my opinion, a legitimate Defensive Player of the Year candidate, not Defensive Rookie of the Year. He ran away with that one. Defensive Player of the Year. And I understand why he didn't win it, especially because the raw sack totals just weren't there for them. And unfortunately, a lot of the voters still care about that big sack total. And obviously, those are the most important game-changing plays you can create as a pass rusher. And unfortunately, early in the season especially, he just was missing way too many sack opportunities. I remember talking about this on my podcast like week 7. Like, he had like a 27% missed tackle rate. A lot of those were missed sacks. So that probably held him back the most. But like, he finished 3rd in PFF pass rush win rate. He finishes 4th in total pressures, 5th in QB hits. And the 2 core pass rushers he was really behind, at least edge rusher-wise, were Myles Garrett, where the Browns' defense stunk and the Browns missed the playoffs, and Nick Bosa, where the Niners' defense had their fallbacks and the Niners missed the playoffs. So if we're just talking about like Defensive Player of the Year voting, we know that team success does go into that. And like, look, you take Jared Verse off of this Rams defense, I'm sorry, Braden Fisk truthers that still are mad at me for as low as I was on him coming out of the draft. I have my apologizing to do about Fisk. I don't care about that. You take Jared Verse off of this team, and this would have been, in my opinion, a bottom 5 defense last year. I firmly believe that, because he also was good against the run too, which was honestly something that he wasn't great at Florida State. He just kind of got his eyes stuck in the backfield at Florida State. I feel like they did a really good job working with him to be more instinctive against the run too. So he's unbelievable, man. Like, I think the arrow's absolutely still pointing up on him. I think there is room for him to get better at deconstructing blocks and getting off of some of these bull rush wins to get more sacks, to impact games even more than just pressuring the quarterback. I think he can develop, I think he has the foot quickness to get better at swipes and inside counters, and even like a rip move. He doesn't have great bend. That's probably his biggest drawback, but he should still be able to have a little bit more of a rip move. So like, he was as productive as he was almost fully with the bull rush and mixing in a little bit extra, but there's plenty more to be unlocked there. And you compare like his rookie season to all of the game's great pass rushers, or at least most of them. Like, think of at least the recent ones, maybe like Aiden Hutchinson and Will Anderson. Versus rookie year was better than those guys, and right on par with what like Nick Bosa and Myles Garrett did out the gate. Certainly better than what like Max Crosby was in his rookie season. Like, all these guys have different flavors and different traits and that kind of stuff. But there's no reason Jared Verse, as early as this season, can't be like fully broken into that elite tier 1 group of edge rushers, win Defensive Player of the Year, and be a core reason why this Rams team can maybe even go on a deep playoff run. And by the way, those numbers I read off to you, that was before the playoffs, where he was a demon in the playoffs. He terrorized Sam Darnold, and then even had 5 pressures and 2 sacks going against the best tackle duo in the NFL with the Philadelphia Eagles. He played his best football down the stretch as well. And if we voted on Defensive Player of the Year after the playoffs, Verse might have had a much stronger argument because he did finish number 1 in pressures if you include playoffs. But his breakthrough here, it completely changes the math on really everything I had kind of said about this Rams D-line last year, where I had those core concerns. Like, obviously, some of these guys are nice players in their own right. But if Jared Verse was just like a good number 2, a good draft hit, that's great. But for him to be that true numbers changer, someone that shifts are going to go his way, chip help is going to go his way, and then you pair that with Chris Shula, who is so good with his schemes, with his stunts, that's when you get that like force multiplying effect from Jared Verse. So he really changes the math with all of this stuff and allows you to get more excited about Kobe Turner for what he is, more excited about Braden Fisk for what he is, more excited about Poona Ford for what he is, and even more excited about Byron Young for what he is. But it all centers around Jared Verse being that true math-changing alpha number 1 guy as he was last year. And you're definitely expecting that he keeps that up. If there is a sophomore slump there, though, you are going to see a regression with this unit. But let's talk about let's more go through the pecking order here as opposed to going through the edge group and then going to the interior. Because with the Rams, it's, after Jared Verse, it's much more about these 3 interior starters here with Kobe Turner, Poona Ford, and Braden Fisk. So Fisk obviously got a lot of attention last year, but Kobe Turner continued to be a really, really good player, and I view him as the number 2 on this D-line. And this comes back to what we said about the Rams, like betting on physical outliers. Kobe Turner, not the freakiest athlete and certainly undersized for the defensive tackle position, but he had some of that Aaron Donald-esque core strength at his size and the instincts and the ability to kind of bend his way through blocks. He's obviously not Aaron Donald, but they saw some of the similar ways that Donald was able to win with. Kobe Turner does some of that stuff, and it makes him a very balanced two-way player. He can get off blocks. He can find the ball in the run game. He's very savvy as a pass rusher. He can get up and under you and drive you backwards. He's quick off the ball. He's so good for all these stunts because he's got enough power to kind of blow up the in-between of the guard and the tackle and be that disruptor. So one of these edge rushers can loop in behind you. But if you want to take Jared Verse to be your sledgehammer, drive into the tackle, impact the guard, and then lean on the quickness of Kobe Turner to loop around that outside edge, he's got the quickness to do that too. So he's very good one-on-one, but he's elite in terms of the scheme fit. And that all came together for a very good season last year where he was impactful against the run, not amazing, right? Like he's still undersized. You can still combo block against him and drive him back off the ball. We saw some of that in that Eagles game, for example. But he also ended up with 54 pressures and 8 sacks, which are very good numbers for a high-end number 2 interior rusher. So him in that role is awesome, as opposed to last year where we would have talked about Kobe Turner as their best player. So the rising tide lifts all boats here with Jared Verse being the rising tide. But then we can talk about Braden Fisk, who is similar to Kobe Turner, but with some differences. Fisk is even more athletic. My take on Fisk is that at some point along the road, he got done dirty because he honestly just looks like a really large linebacker to me in terms of height and arm length and just his athletic ability. Like I could have seen him being at 240 pounds if he went that route once upon a time, wherever, the coach determined what position he was supposed to play. I could have seen Fisk coming out as like a, freaky linebacker prospect. But he has grown into his game as a defensive tackle, and it gives him a very unique skill set. And I think absolutely, like the vision to use him inside this scheme, not to take that away from Braden Fisk, it's something he does so uniquely well, is run these stunts within this scheme. But it's not necessarily beating guys one-on-one all the time, right? But for a D-line that they don't want to blitz a ton, but they do want to run these stunts, as we've described, your ET stunts, your TE stunts, where you need a guy with the athletic looping ability of a Braden Fisk. He might be the best looping defensive tackle in the NFL for these stunts. And that paired with his college teammate in Jared Verse with that chemistry where you can take a Jared Verse and just detonate a guard and a tackle and run Braden Fisk around the outside like unlike any defensive tackle is able to run. That led to so much production for this Rams team. And it's kind of a sensitive conversation because it's like, well, yeah, he's not really like winning a lot of one-on-one reps. He's not really winning in the way that you typically praise guys at this position. But if you use him the right way, he does have a unique skill set that really nobody else has, at least the twitch and athleticism that he has. So a lot of his production came off of the scheme. But I will say he did get much better as the year went on and impressed me in that way too, to actually win one-on-one reps. And that was reflected in the numbers. So for the first half of the year, he was 69th in the NFL. Nice. In pass rush win rate. Like, that's not a starter in terms of just winning one-on-one reps. And that was kind of my concern with him, was that he would kind of flail his arms, couldn't really stick the bull rush because he does have short arms, didn't really have that pass rush tool belt in terms of pass rushing moves to win a lot of one-on-one reps at Florida State. Those were my concerns on him, and that showed early. But as the year went on and this D-line was just playing like a bunch of banshees and playing with the confidence that they had, I think Braden Fisk came into his own, and I respect his game a lot more today than I did even of him coming out of Florida State against college competition, because he started winning with the bull rush. I felt like his college tape and even early in the season when he would go one-on-one, I kind of said it earlier, but there was just a lot of ineffective nonsense going on with him just constantly trying to win with that athleticism. And you would get the occasional splash play that was really exciting. But for him to actually say, you know what, and we saw this as the season went on, I can fly off the ball. I can channel that get off and my strong core into a bull rush. That's where a lot of those pass rush wins came as the year went on. So him now having more power to his game, I think as a pass rusher can be a much more impactful player. And that's where I was wrong on him, was his ability to develop that part of his game, especially because I was worried about the shorter arms and his ability to stick that bull rush. I've now seen some pretty exciting flashes of it. And I definitely have the up arrow on Braden Fisk as well, especially as a pass rusher. As a run defender, he's terrible and still is terrible. He was not good coming out of Florida State, and he was a problem for them last year. Like, that's just kind of is what it is. They love what he brings to the table scheme-wise and, some of the development we talked about as a pass rusher, but you're probably always going to live with some run defense deficiencies from him because he's just not built to play the run as a defensive tackle. He's undersized with short arms. It's not a good combination. Yeah, he can split gaps and occasionally get into the backfield and have some nice highlight plays, but your typical down and down stuff, he's going to get driven off the ball and he's going to struggle to get off blocks. So I don't think that's going to get too much better. And it might hold him back from becoming a true superstar, but as a third member of this defensive line now, perfectly fine now with that. And perfectly fine with using 2 second-round picks to go get that player for what he's looking like right now. And that was where I was really critical of the Rams, was being a little over-aggressive to come up and get him. I'm going to back off of that take. Like, he's looking like a good use of 2 second-round picks right now. And then he got Poona Ford. He's a core part of this as well. Now, they had this role last year with Bobby Brown, and they just found, I think, an even better player in Poona Ford, who, again, is one of these physical outliers. He's one of the more hilarious-looking players in the league at about 5'11", 310 pounds, but you cannot move this guy off the line of scrimmage. You know, you think of a nose tackle, you're like, oh, give me the 6'4", 335-pound guy. Well, it's actually probably harder to move the 5'11" boulder than it is the behemoth 6'4" guy, because you just can't get under his pads. So he can just drop the kickstand, and he's not going anywhere. So I think you're getting a better anchoring nose tackle for the odd fronts that this team runs. And by the way, they ran more base 3-4 than anybody in the NFL last year. So that's not going to change. Really a reasonable signing. And then when you get into your nickel defenses on third downs, Puna's probably going to come off the field. He's just not quite as athletic and gifted as a pass rusher as guys like Kobe Turner and Fisk. But he's going to play his role there and play it very well. And that rounds out a really nice group of starters. And frankly, the Rams, and they've done this for a long time, but they use rotations probably less than anybody in the league. I'd have to go through the numbers to back that up. But they're not teams like the Eagles and the Jets over the years that they want these like hockey lines. The Rams mostly kind of ask these guys to play all three downs and play a lot of snaps. Inevitably, they're going to have to catch some breathers. But I think that's reflected in the Rams having quite possibly the worst defensive line depth in the NFL. So you definitely want to see these guys stay healthy. Because if they have to go to these guys, there's really only one player on their depth chart that interests me at all. And that sounds harsh, but it's true. And that's Josiah Stewart, a third-round pick that I really liked. Another one of these physical outliers. He did not test well. He's a much better athlete than how he ran. I have no idea what happened. He ran a 4.85, I think at his pro day. I didn't even put that into my own draft guide because I was like, no, that's something had to be going on. You have to really look into it. Maybe he was rehabbing an injury and his technique was off, or he just got bad starts, or whatever it was. I mean, he is at worst like a 4.7 speed on tape. I didn't think he was a burner, but he's a much better athlete than that, and that's something the Rams are going to bet on. Like the Rams, above all teams, and most teams are getting into using this more often, but they use the charting data and the GPS, and they just watch the tape, and they put less stock in the testing numbers than pretty much anybody. So I think this is going to be another case where the Rams are able to steal value in the draft in a guy that, had Josiah Stewart just ran a 4.65, like a normal expected 40 time, I would think he goes in the second round, but he probably falls around because teams were scared off by the 40 time, because a lot of teams are stupid. The Rams aren't stupid. And Josiah Stewart's a really complete pass rusher, not the trade-its guy, probably never going to be what Jared Verse is, but can he be a good number two opposite of him? And Jesus, I just noticed I completely ignored Byron Young. We'll come back to Byron Young, but honestly, I'm not even that mad about it because I am more excited about Josiah Stewart and his future with this team than I am with Byron Young. Because like I was saying with Josiah Stewart, he wins with a lot of craft. He's got great swipes. He's got adequate speed to bend to win around the corner. He's excellent at using that threat of speed to then win inside on inside counters. And he's got more power than you would expect because of his great step and his toughness. So he really can win in every way. He just isn't going to dominate in every single way. Kind of the definition of a number two guy. And then he's savvy against the run. He's never going to be a great impact against the run because he's just undersized there. But he's got a little bit of that like old Shaq Barrett in him where he is not going to forfeit a blade of grass. He's got that Michigan Big Ten style toughness in there, and he's going to do okay against the run because of it, even if he can't necessarily set a hard edge in a traditional sense. But yeah, I do think he plays. Michael Hoyt is on the way out. That's 639 snaps vacated off the edge. So those will probably all just go to Josiah Stewart. So I don't feel bad that we discussed him before Byron Young. But yeah, Byron Young gonna be the leading snap getter as your edge two here. Look, I know he had 7.5 sacks, 44 pressures. He's a fun player. For a third-round pick, you've definitely gotten your returns on him. And talk about perfect scheme usage. If you want an athlete for all these stunts that can just utilize space and miscommunicate, like take advantage of miscommunications off those stunts where he gets a free rush lane and then he can just tap into that 4.4 speed and just blaze after the quarterback. Or if you are running a stunt and you know the quarterback's going to react a certain way, like some quarterbacks have tendencies that if they see the stunt, like Sam Darnold does this sometimes, if they see the stunt, they're going to naturally roll right. They tell Byron Young, like, hey, don't worry about beating your guy. Just kind of get ready to chase after the QB that we're going to flush out of the pocket because of the scheme. He's a great weapon in that sense. But you can find edge rushers that are just really fast. I don't see a ton else in Byron Young's game other than just speed and motor. He doesn't win one-on-one reps. The flashes of him winning are very few and far between. Like, you got to go through his whole season to find 3 or 4 examples of him like actually putting on a pass rush move and winning just a one-on-one pass rush opportunity. Josiah Stewart to me is going to be much better at doing that. So I don't know where Rams fans are at on Byron Young. Maybe he gets better. I don't know, man. Like, he is heading into his 3rd season, but he is 27 years old. He had this unique backstory coming out of Tennessee. Maybe more of a pass rushing plan can still develop in there. It's not necessarily something I'm projecting, but I would love Rams fans' feedback on just where you're at on Byron Young. Personally, if I were a Rams fan, I'm looking at this as like, yep, Byron Young's got a good role within this scheme as our 5th best defensive lineman. We got 2 years of cheap control. When his contract's up, someone else can overpay for the production that we've schemed up for him, and Josiah Stewart's going to be our long-term number 2 opposite of Jared Verse. That's the way I see it probably playing out, but I'm curious what Rams fans think, and it's not a bad problem to have, right? We question this team's depth, but we did list 3 interior D linemen as starters. So you run 3 deep on interior D linemen and 3 deep on the edge. That's not horrible. But after that, honestly, I don't have anything really else to say about these guys. I mean, I thought Brennan Jackson, their 5th round pick last year, I figured he would be their number 2 edge. I did see before I started this recording, he got waived. I think he'll probably be back on the practice squad anyway. But yeah, he's not on the 53. That means Nick Hampton, I guess, probably made it. Or maybe they're going to look at other cuts. They probably should. But Nick Hampton's just a much, much worse version of Josiah Stewart as just kind of an undersized edge type. I don't really want to see either of those guys having to get out there on the field. I think that's something went wrong here for the Rams. And then interior D-line wise, like, okay, Tyler Davis had to play a little bit last year. You kind of got what you could have expected there based on his college tape as a 6th round pick last year. He's a very poor man's version of Braden Fisk as a twitchy, undersized interior player. Ty Hamilton drafted really off of the fact that he played at Ohio State. His brother was a second contract player in the league, and he tested well. His tape is not good. This was the opposite example of the Rams, where they're betting on an athlete on this D-line where they can scheme the guy up. Maybe they can develop some stuff and they get more out of him than you would expect. But for 5 years at an Ohio State program, you would have liked to see a guy show some development, and he really didn't. Laryl Murchison, DeJuan Johnson, these guys have played as hybrid ends. One of those guys probably makes it, and then Jack Heflin maybe gets stashed as a backup nose tackle. But yeah, really poor depth on the interior of the D-line after really your first guy off the bench, if you will. But overall, it is a very good defensive line that really broke out last year. I don't know that they're going to get too much better than I have them ranking here. Verse and Fisk have potential to keep climbing, certainly, which could see some gains in the 11th overall defensive line ranking. But overall, this is especially the pass rush is a legitimate strength for this Rams defense. But let's go to the linebackers. Definitely some shakeup in this group. So they say goodbye to Christian Roseboom, who has had to play a lot here. He's racked up a lot of tackles, but I don't think Rams fans are going to miss him too much, but a moderate loss. But they did make some very nice additions here. They pick up Nate Landman, who the Falcons let go, and then some sneaky good draft picks, Chris Paul Jr. in the 5th round and Sean Dolak, an undrafted pickup. We will see if he makes this team, but very good value that we can discuss with those guys as well. But I did say upgraded at linebacker, and this was a unit that really struggled last year. I just don't think Christian Roseboom is that good physical player, but misses a lot of tackles and not a great athlete. I think Nate Landman is just a much better version of what you had in Christian Roseboom, where, okay, still not a great athlete, not a great cover player, but really a high-intensity run defender. I was surprised, frankly, that the Falcons let him go. Maybe they just viewed him a little bit redundant with Christian Ellis, but he knows this system. This was really the scheme that ran with the Falcons, and he's going to come over and do a lot of the same stuff with the Rams. So I'm a big fan of this upgrading the run defense really with Nate Landman, and then they can hopefully try to shelter him in coverage and not ask too much of him there. I don't have too much else to say about Nate Landman. It's just a very nice signing and an upgrade there. And then you have probably Omar Speights is going to be your LB2. Now, it is worth noting that the Rams will run a decent amount of those 5-1 penny fronts, where they actually won't have a second linebacker out there. They'll have those 5 defensive linemen with like Nate Landman in the middle behind there. And that's probably where that'll probably be where Omar comes off the field for about, I don't know, I don't have the numbers on that, but probably about 20% of the time they'll be in those penny fronts, at least when they're in nickel. And that's smart because Omar Speights, not a great athlete, not a super productive coverage player last year. Like maybe he can continue to surprise there and develop the zone IQ and stuff, but he's kind of a heat-seeking, aggressive, run-defending specialist right now. Again, maybe that changes, but as an LB2, I think he's just fine, and they should get much better run defense at this linebacker spot than they got last year. This was, I think, the biggest problem with their run defense, frankly, was how bad they were at linebacker. So you already upgraded going from Roseboom to Nate to Landman, and then Speights kind of had to earn this job as the season went on. As an undrafted rookie last year, he wasn't really penciled in as a full-time starter until about week 10. Granted, I think he was injured to start, but getting a full season of him should be an improvement as well. So that is reflected in the rankings. Like their linebacker run defense would have been probably bottom 3 last year. So now they're closer to the middle of the league, 19th to 25th for run defense. Now they are still at the very bottom of the league, tied for last for coverage, and that does get their overall linebacker ranking at 28th. So it is better from where they were last year, and the Rams are going with the approach that I think the smart NFL teams that don't have elite linebackers are taking, and that is we don't need to prioritize linebacker. We don't need to draft them high or spend a bunch of money there, but what we can't have is being a complete liability there. And we've seen like the 2023 Eagles were a liability at linebacker. They went out and addressed it. The Rams were a liability at linebacker last year. They're hoping that's not going to be the case this year. Now, I'm not saying one of these guys is going to come in and be, what Zach Bond was for the Eagles and be an all-pro. But generally speaking, it's like, let's just not be a problem at linebacker, especially in run defense. And they should be much, much better there. So I like where they're at. The floor is pretty damn good. And then I like their draft picks, man. Chris Paul, 5th round pick, and Sean Dolak, an undrafted pickup who should have been drafted. But this was just an egregiously terrible linebacker class. Like I cannot stress enough how few linebackers I felt were really draft worthy. There were 5 guys that I really viewed as like in the first 4 rounds of the draft, I would be considering to differing degrees, right? And Chris Paul was the 4th guy on that list. And then there was one other guy in Sean Dolak, who was my LB6, who I did have a 4th to a 5th round grade on, basically because the linebacker class was so bad, as an outlier player. Tell me if you've heard this before, as a guy with not a lot of size, not great traits, but awesome tape that I would have, taken a gamble on early day 3 just to see if those, if he can translate, kind of like Avon Pace was a few years ago. And that worked out for the Vikings, obviously. Different players, but same kind of idea where the tape was good, but the traits didn't really check out. Well, Dolak goes undrafted, and Chris Paul falls to the 5th round, and Chris Paul also was horribly undersized. Both these guys had one potential crippling weakness, and that was abysmal arm length. So at a position where you want the length to get off blocks and to finish tackles, both Chris Paul and Sean Dolak measured the only linebackers out of 21 that I wrote up, the only linebackers under 30-inch arms were Chris Paul Jr. and Sean Dolak. And the Rams ended up with both these guys. But I kind of lumped these two together because both have really fun coverage tape. In the case of Chris Paul, he's very fast. And in the case of both of these guys, very instinctive. So just like really good values for a team that has, I think at least shown with Omar Speights, a little bit with like Ernest Jones a few years ago. They've shown that they can find some guys. They found themselves in a pretty tough spot, at least early last year, but definitely think Chris Paul and Sean Dolak, at least as interesting depth this year and potential starters in the future. Excellent pickups. A lot of kind of potential there between Paul and Dolak and Spates to at least have like adequate linebackers in, with cheap control for the next 2 or 3 years. With Landman obviously being the veteran that's kind of raising the floor there. And then you have Troy Reader, backup type. Rams fans are familiar with him. He's backup. But still a lot of work to do with this linebacking group, but they are, again, in a much better spot than they were last season. And I think Rams fans are pretty excited to at least see that 19th to 25th ranking for linebacker run defense, saying, all right, we're starting to get close to average with that unit. But let's talk about this secondary. It's not a great unit, and they didn't really do much to address it. This is, I think, the weak link of this defense, and I think they know that. But in terms of offseason changes, really nothing to talk about at all. They let Tre'Davious White go mid-season. That was kind of their flyer on a regressing veteran, and then they didn't really add anybody at corner. And same deal at safety. They didn't lose anybody, but they didn't add anybody. So it's pretty much the same group here, and it's just not a great spot to be. So the Rams do still rank pretty low here in the secondary. They're 26th to 29th for DB coverage. I do think these guys earned some credit for what they were doing in run defense, where they're in that good middle cluster for DB run support, which ranks 10th to 21st. And by the way, big-time fans of this series will like to hear that next year I do have plans to kind of come up with more of a overall secondary ranking that's going to obviously prioritize the coverage side and then use the run support grades for these units as kind of a tiebreaker, so that we'll get a little bit more definitive splits and rankings for these overall secondaries. So something to look forward to for next year's series. But anyway, let's get into this questionable Rams secondary. Now, it's important to keep in mind that they play that top-down zone style and just try to not ask a lot of these guys and win up front with the pass rush and the scheme. And, that's a floor-raising approach that Rams fans have become familiar with over the years, but it also reduces their upside, for sure. It's not a team that's going to run much man coverage. They were in man just 14.8% of the time last year, which was 27th in the NFL. And, it's a scheme choice, but it's also a personnel choice. They just don't have the guys to do that. But in terms of having veterans, smart guys on the back end for the most part that are going to do their job and try to prevent big plays, that's really just the approach that this unit's going with. So just kind of keep that in mind as we go through this unit, because all these guys, for the most part, are short conversations that kind of lump into the same bucket. So you got the aging Darius Williams that is regressing at 32, going on 33 years old now. It's just hard to keep that up as a corner, especially when you're an undersized guy that already didn't have like blazing speeds. So he's doing what he can. He's still, one of the higher zone IQ defenders in the league. But you're seeing the missed tackle rates go up, and you're seeing just the ability to make an impact in coverage go down. So he's fine as one more year is kind of a Band-Aid after they bring him back from Jacksonville last offseason. And then you got Akello Witherspoon, who's settled in now at 30 years old. He's kind of landed as like an adequate CB2, someone you're probably always going to be looking to upgrade on and replace long-term. But, he's developed over the years. He's physical. He's got the length you look for. He's missed a lot of time throughout his career, so you're hoping he can stay healthy. But they really landed on him as their go-to starter, and he wasn't a problem for this defense. And I think there's reason to believe he can keep that up. And then arguably the most exciting player in this secondary is Quentin Lake. Not that you're projecting him with like crazy upside or anything like that, but he's just a very fun guy to watch. He is super, super heady, really good at reading the quarterback's eyes. He's really settled in as this team's slot corner. He's, a safety by trade, but they play him as their slot corner and their big nickel. And that's the direction a lot of these really forward-thinking defenses are going towards, is just taking a safety, playing him as your nickel corner, because you're getting a guy that's had more experience taking on blocks and being more of a presence in the run game, and is theoretically like they're usually better tacklers, safeties are, compared to corners. And it just works. If you're a zone-heavy defense, there's really not a big reason not to just play a safety there. So that's what the Rams are doing with Quentin Lake. But, he's got quick twitch, and he can pick guys up man-to-man or in-zone match, cover corner routes and out routes. He's not perfect. He's not the most tradesy player or anything like that. But I like Quentin Lake a lot. He deserves some respect as a very solid starting nickel corner in the league. And he's heading into the last year of his rookie deal. I would imagine he's a guy that they want to pay. I bet we get a mid-season extension on Quentin Lake that's like probably in the kind of range of what like Elijah Molden got, like 3 years, $18 million, just very nice player that they've, we talk about the Rams drafting well and filling in the depth much better with just late round picks and player development. Quentin Lake is a key part of that storyline there. And then on the back end, you got Cam Curl, veteran, balanced safety, one of the more abysmal athletes among starting safeties in the league. So he's not always going to get in playmaking range. He's not going to have a ton of range to like break up passes and be an impact on the back end, but smart guy, not going to bust coverages, make sure everybody's lined up appropriately, tackle consistently on the back end. That's what he's there for, and he does a good job of that. And then you have the other Cameron Kinchins, next to him. Now, he's the most juiced up playmaking style DB on the back end here. He's the one that does have some ball skills and will take some risks. It's nice to have one of those guys on the back end because those are obviously game-changing plays. And the other 4 starters here had just 2 interceptions last season. Cam Kinchin had 4. Now, we know interceptions are volatile at the safety position, but he's got the ball skills and that kind of ball hawking mentality. He had that going back to Miami. Got to clean up some of the missed tackles and get better and better as a run defender and more consistent as a coverage player. But, the arrow is pointing up on him. He looks like a very good use of a 3rd-round pick. He played about half their snaps last year before really settling in as a full-time starter in the second half of the year. So he is... I'm running through it in my head. I think you can make an argument he is the candidate for most improved and the kind of biggest area of this defense to take a big step forward is like, could Cam Kinchins kind of be a Kirby Joseph-esque breakout at the safety position? I think that potential is there for him. He's a very fun young player. So maybe I take back what I said about Quentin Lake being the most exciting player in this secondary. It's probably Cam Kinchins. But then in terms of depth, you've got some names. It's just kind of standard NFL depth. You got one guy that can play as a backup, and that's Kobe Durant, and he'll get some run as a dime back, just kind of making a presence in the nickel, kind of a mirror image of Quentin Lake in many ways. But, he can play outside as well. I compared him a lot to Darius Williams as a prospect, and he's shown his flashes. Like, again, if you have an injury on the outside, he can step in. If you have an injury in the nickel, he can step in, and you kind of don't miss a beat with Kobe Durant. So I do like that depth-wise. But then you got Emmanuel Forbes, rehabilitation project here. I did say when the Commanders released him, I said I really want to see him go to an off-zone inspired defense because that's what he did in college. Was he played off quarters, he read the QB's eyes, and he was elite with that first step ball hawking ability. We had to watch Ron Rivera try to use him as like a press man corner on A.J. Brown. It's like, what did you think you drafted there, buddy? So I do like the scheme fit, but he has been horrible in the NFL. So I can't rank him too high, but he is interesting to me as someone that could have a kind of mid-career reemergence here. Infamously was drafted over Christian Gonzalez, one of the most egregious draft decisions any organization has made in recent years. Fortunately, it's not the Rams that made that decision. So they get theoretically all the upside with none of the risk. But we will see if he even makes this team, right? Cut deadline's coming up. He could be gone, but you got Darian Kendrick, who missed last season, but he's been he's the slowest corner that's gotten any significant playing time in the league over the last 5 years that I can remember. But he is a heady player, and they've survived with him kind of at times. So we'll see if he's healthy and makes this team. Josh Wallace played a little bit last year, undrafted out of Michigan last year. Wouldn't say he played particularly well. And then you got 4 other guys still kind of hanging on. Charles Woods, not Charles Woods' son, is one of those names. But then in terms of safety, you've got one name there, really, Jalen McCullough, just kind of an example of just how fluky interception numbers are. he ended up getting out there for 300 snaps last year. I think he played okay, and they, I think, are interested in him as a backup, but he had 4 interceptions himself on the back end last year as well. So he's probably the first man in, and then we'll see who else makes it. I would imagine the Rams are going to kind of keep their eyes open to see if any safeties they like get cut, because I feel like you might want a little bit more proven depth than just Jalen McCullough. But there is your Rams secondary. It's the definition of a kind of veteran, adequate group that you're not terribly excited about. Really, the only guy there is Cam Kinchins. See if he can take a big leap here in year 2. But despite questions in the secondary, this is still a very solid defense. They head into the year for me ranking 18th for overall defense, 19th in pass defense, and 24th in run defense. So that's pretty par for the course, kind of picking up where they were at the end of last season as a pretty goodish pass defense, very much in that kind of middle cluster of just very solid to good pass defenses. And then not a great run defense, but better than they were last year. Upgrading at nose tackle, getting better at linebacker, more certainty in the secondary, I think, than they had last year at least. So it all makes sense. In terms of their ability to be much better than that, they have some upside to keep getting better there. I'd be very surprised if the Rams ended up a top 10 defense. But if they could be in that 12 to 16 range and Matthew Stafford can stay healthy, be that bona fide top 5 offense, this team is going to be very good and very much in the mix. We do have to talk about their special teams. And as far as offseason changes, they did sign Britton Covey. We'll see if he ends up making this team, but he's kind of an established punt returner option for them. But their special teams also came out very solid, B- grade, but 13th overall at special teams there. Just pretty much just very good to solid across the board with Ethan Evans, who's been a good young punter. I think if Covey does make this team, you got a good punt returner there. You got Jordan Whittington's very solid option as a kick returner. He showed that last year. The main question is going to be the young Joshua Carty at kicker. Wasn't horrible as a rookie there, but we know young kickers can be very up and down year to year. And even last year, he had pretty mediocre grades. Comes out as our 29th overall kicker here, missed 5 field goals and 4 PATs there in his rookie season. But yeah, still should be in pretty good shape with their special teams. So let's begin to recap this Rams team. We'll take a look at their strengths, weaknesses, and pivotal factors. The Rams are probably the most unique team that we've looked at here in this segment, because that list of wild cards, those pivotal factors, your swing factors, if you will, for these teams, very, very short for the Rams. This is a very high floor team that are pretty solid across the board. The main wild card is Matthew Stafford and his durability. Yeah, you've got some different pockets of upside, guys like Cam Kinchins and Omar Spates, maybe like a Steve Avila on the offensive line. There's still some young players that could continue to get better and make some of these more adequate units closer to strengths for sure, but those units aren't definitive wild cards for the Rams either. It really is just, can Matthew Stafford stay healthy? If he does, you've got a strength at quarterback, great weapons, a great running back, elite offensive coaching, awesome defensive coaching, a great pass rush, so many strengths to work with there. And then they do have some weaknesses, a secondary that they do a good job scheming around and not letting it be a back-breaking weakness for them. And then some less concerning areas to be weak in, things like linebacker coverage and D-line depth that are much easier to work around, though you still want to note those as weaknesses for this team relative to the rest of the league. But yeah, if Matthew Stafford stays healthy, this team has turned things around over the last couple of years into a very, very stable roster and a contending team. But let's finish this video by taking a look at their schedule and ask if they're in a good position there to get this done this year. And I would say yes. They draw two of the worst divisions in the league with the NFC South and the AFC South. And their own division, it's good. Like, the NFC West is good, but they're pretty much winnable in any game. Like, it's going to be kind of a bloodbath in all these NFC West games, in my opinion. But, like, there's nothing about this schedule that scares me. And their hardest games are early, at Philadelphia, at Baltimore. Both happen in the first 6 weeks. And then I don't want to say they coast through the rest of the year, but there's just not a lot of like overwhelming opponents in there where you can say like, okay, if the Rams are healthy, if you're through that week 8 bye week and you feel good about where Stafford's at and these guys are playing well, they should be able to take care of business and finish very strong. They do have that week 15 game at home against Detroit. That is definitely their hardest game, that in at San Francisco week 10. But even those two matchups, a good Rams team, a healthy Rams team, I have them as pick'em games there at San Fran and at home against Detroit. So obviously I think very highly of this Rams team, and Vegas kind of doesn't. Like their over-under is between 9.5 and 10.5. Like if you bet the over on 9.5, it doesn't pay very well. If you bet the over on 10.5, it pays very well. But like Super Bowl odds, they're 20-1, which that's tied for eighth to 9th. But their division odds 2-1 to win this division, and they're not even first in this division, which I disagree with. I have the Rams ranked first in this division. The bettors and Vegas and the market has the Niners as favorites in this division. I mean, look, yes, it's just one player, but the Rams have just as many injury questions as the Niners do that could impact their season, right? And I think if these teams are full force, I think I like the Rams more than the Niners. It's obviously close. They're a team apart in these power rankings. But needless to say, I think there's definitely some value there on the division odds. And I think if you're making a bet, that's probably the way to go. Because if Matthew Stafford's healthy, they're probably going to go over, and they're probably going to win the division. So you just get a much better payout going for them to win the division. But both the over and the division odds are probably where I would go with my money. And then, Super Bowl odds, if you're really high in this Rams team, I wouldn't stop you. 20-1 on the Rams too. So I think I find myself pretty high in this Rams team. It just, I don't mean to oversimplify things, but they just need Matthew Stafford to stay healthy. And I don't think that's a hot take. It's perfect timing. I'm losing my voice. But I don't think it's a hot take at this point to say that that's really what is going to make or break this Rams team's season. We've seen that in years past. But they are at least somewhat insulated to a short-term injury on Matthew Stafford. I still think Jimmy Garoppolo can keep this team afloat, and hopefully things work out where even if Stafford does get hurt, they can get him healthy at the right time down the stretch and into the playoffs. So that's going to do it for our Rams deep dive here today. You guys will have to let me know what you think of this Rams ranking here at number 7. Is it too high, too low, or just right? Who do you think comes in with the number 5 spot? Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss our 5 remaining deep dives here, and they will be flying off the board here. Going to be having to drink some tea to conserve my voice because we have a lot of these to get done here in the final week of the offseason here. Very excited. Can start to smell football season, certainly. I hope you guys are as stoked as I am. I hope you enjoyed this video. But until the next deep dive, cheers, and I'll see you soon.